What's up, fellow internet denizens? I was a stupid kid. That's it, pack it up, that's the video. Goodbye. Actually, I was probably an average kid who asked a lot of questions, but I pieced together the grown-ups' answers in some rather odd ways. So let's talk about it. This isn't just gonna be a list of things that I believed when I was a little kid. We're gonna fact-check my younger self and use facts and logic to explain the truth behind some of these phenomena so we can learn something! Yay! I'm leaving sources in the description because learning is fun. So, first off, I thought owls would turn on the street light by landing on them, and seagulls would likewise turn them off. I thought this was because owls come out at night and seagulls come out at daytime, and I saw a seagull on a light pole once as it turned off. So this isn't true, obviously. I don't think that cities have flocks of trained birds that know how to turn lights off. However, I am still puzzled as to how these poles work, so let's learn something. According to how stuff works, there is a circuit called a cadmium sulfide photoresistor, which reacts differently depending on how much light hits it. When a lot of light hits it, the chemicals within react better. This is routed into an electromagnet that turns the light off. Then when it gets dark, the chemicals don't react as well and cause the magnet to weaken, turning the light on. Sounds like it should work the other way around, but science is weird, I guess. Also, not all owls come out at night. Bats would probably be a better animal to turn on streetlights if that system even worked. Speaking of bats, there was this cute goth teacher at my elementary school that I never had, but I always saw her drinking from this one drinking fountain. All the first graders called her a vampire. I would drink from her drinking fountain so that I could be a vampire and turn into a cloud of bats because I thought that would be cool. So first off, this is impossible, unfortunately. However, something my younger self probably didn't know at the time was that, according to Bram Stoker's Dracula, the titular character could turn into a bat, a dog, or a cloud of mist. So there were a lot of cool options if I were to turn into a vampire. There are several other vampire stories where vampires can turn into other things. Now that I think of it, coastal suburban Los Angeles is a great place for vampires, at least when I grew up there, because the hill I lived on was covered with mist for like 80% of the year. We called that the marine layer, by the way. Hell, in the original Dracula manuscript, vampires are not directly killed by sunlight. They just get significantly weaker. I'm linking Gutenberg Project's copy of Dracula in the description in case you guys haven't read it already. It's a great book and it's public domain, so have fun. Speaking of monsters, I thought there was some kind of chittering skeletal monster on my roof for a bit, and I'd stop after a while when I realized that monsters aren't real and Mom told me it was just animals fighting. I was still rather curious as to what this was, so I looked up various local animal noises just to cross-reference which animals were doing that and why, and let's talk about it. So, raccoons mate in places they feel are far from humans. I think the roof of a two-story house from a raccoon's perspective is pretty far removed from a human that can chase you away. Normally they nest nearby, so that would also explain the amount of times we had to flush raccoons out of the crawl space. Also, I included a video in the description with the noises they make because I want you to know exactly why I thought there were spiny skeletal demons that wanted to drain my blood. I also thought that stingrays were a common dangerous threat and always out for blood, and this worsened after Steve Irwin's tragic death. Actually, where I'm from, they're very common, and you have most likely seen one at least once if you go to the beach often. Hell, if you looked off the pier on certain days, you could watch them swarm. Fortunately, there's a thing you can do called a stingray shuffle, where you kick up sand and that shoos them away. They're not out for blood though. They just don't like humans stepping on them while they bask. I don't know about the ones that got Steve Irwin though. Maybe they're a little bit more territorial. My marine bio class only focused on SoCal, not Australia, so. Okay, last animal one. I thought that possums were immortal beings and kind of just pretended to die when they were supposed to actually die, just to fool death. I found this was false when one accidentally strangled himself on the rope ladder in my backyard playhouse. It was covered with ants and I had nightmares for a bit after that. Now, possums are very cool little fellas. They eat parasites and are immune to the diseases that ticks carry. And they're also immune to rabies. When they play dead, that's called thanatosis. And they loll their tongue out, emit a stench, and breathe very slowly to the point where you can't tell if it's breathing or not. The only real way to tell if it's actually dead is if it's been like that for at least a few hours. I assume this doesn't work with strangulation because that's really hard to fake. Alright, let's get to something really stupid. There was this rumor around my elementary school that the reason Link from Zelda was silent and only really ever grunted or cried out was that his voice actor died falling down the stairs in the studio. And they somehow recorded that and put that into the game as tribute and never hired another voice actor again. I didn't believe that one, ever. I I just wanted to throw that out there because it's stupid, and that was my school's Marilyn Manson ribcage type rumor. This is obviously fake, and I don't need a source here aside from human decency because who would do that? Maybe I'll link a Zelda CDI clip because he talks there and I wish he didn't. Speaking of playground rumors, I dug for this thing called Indian clay in the sandboxes at school, and to this day I have no idea what it was. It was this moist, rusty brown mud stuff. All I know is that people traded it around for stickers and airsoft BBs. I only found 2 sources about this, one on somebody's blog spot and one on some guy's Reddit post. Neither of those are really good sources. Everything else was something about beauty masks. By all accounts, Indian clay was probably just child lore trying to hype up mud. Alright, let's get into something a bit more serious now, but really interesting. So I thought that driving backwards effectively sucked up emissions and that more people should just drive backwards to reverse climate change. Same with the odometer, actually. I thought that driving backwards would roll back the odometer. It's safe to say that the first part is 100% false if you think about it for more than a second. Now, the odometer is interesting. According to Motor Trends, in older models, the odometer is analog, meaning that it's a system of gears connected to your engine that records how many times your tires rotate. You actually could reverse the odometer until the 60s, but they made things a little bit more complicated around that time, and driving backwards would be recorded. Modern odometers record your mileage with magnetic sensors feeding into a central computer, which makes it even more complicated. When researching this, I came across something called odometer fraud, which I had no idea was a thing. Apparently, you're not supposed to roll back your odometer if you're trying to sell your car, and that makes sense. You wouldn't want a car that's gonna fall apart once it leaves the lot, right? Speaking of mechanical things, I thought there was a big security room where a guy pulled levers on automatic doors, causing them to open and close. I think everybody thought this at some point. I'm pretty sure there was a Calvin and Hobbes comic about that. So, automatic doors obviously don't have a guy at this Batcave-like console frantically pressing buttons every time somebody appears on his cameras. There are a lot of ways that these apparatuses work, however. Some of these emit infrared rays and open the doors whenever something interrupts said ray. Some use pressure plates, others use buttons. You've probably seen a handicap button near the door of one building or another. Others use optical sensors, which measure light changes. And finally, some use radar, though those only detect movement. The source I used here was from the UK, so I'm gonna spitball here and say we probably don't do the whole radar thing in the US, but who knows. Okay, so this is probably the most personal one here, but I'm autistic and therefore never liked looking at faces. When I heard the phrase rolling one's eyes, I thought people's eyes rolled in a circle when bored, so if I was bored, I would do that until my eyes hurt or I felt sick. It took me until maybe I was 16 before I realized I was doing it wrong. Now, eye rolling is a learned behavior, and if you don't look at people's faces that often, you probably won't really know what people mean when they say rolling their eyes. In fact, the meaning of eye rolling differs between cultures. There are some groups in Africa where rolling your eyes into your head shows how attractive you are, for instance. Alright, so I thought the sun's inevitable death was sooner than it would actually be. I learned about the sun's death when I asked my dad, a scientist, what the sun is like, and my dad told me everything about the sun that he knew. My 8-year-old brain could not comprehend that 5 billion years is a long time, and I thought that since the sun is a fire, we could just snuff it out. So I had this solution. We make a giant metal shell around it so it consumes all of its fuel quicker and dies instead of growing bigger and killing everything. Sort of like putting a lid on a candle, and we'd all live happily ever after. I even remember drawing this out in my diary at one point. Impossible gigastructures aside, the sun is awesome. We orbit an entity that most humans cannot comprehend. I credit my dad for getting me interested in space, and I think it's awesome that this impossibly big ancient orb grants us warmth and life. I especially think that solar flares and their cycles are cool. Well, warm. Very warm. Anyway, if we put out the sun, we'd all die a slow freezing death with about 8 minutes warning, so shame on me for thinking that we could do that. Finally, I thought that snow would sound like either a salt shaker or sleigh bells. I grew up in a place where it hadn't snowed since the 20s, and while I had a good view of snowy mountains every day, we only went up there on days when it was clear, so I never really experienced snowfall until I went to college in a place where it snowed. I was transfixed by the fact that it was completely silent. So let's figure out why. According to the Weather Channel, 6-pointed snowflakes catch sound in their gaps as they fall. As they collect on the ground, they become this pad of essentially acoustic foam, absorbing even more sound. However, this won't last long. The snowpack melts, then refreezes, rinse, repeat, until this acoustic padding effect reverses and sound travels a lot better than usual. I think I just associated snowfall with jingling sounds because every piece of kids media had sleigh bells playing whenever snow fell. I'm probably not the only kid from SoCal who associated the two. So that was all the weird things I remember believing as a kid. I hope you guys learned something here because I learned a lot while making this video. I'd like to know what weird stuff you guys believed in growing up. Also, did any of you guys dig up Indian clay, or was that just my elementary school? Did you guys have a different word for it? I'd love to know. I've been Alien Daydreamer, and I am out. Bye!